Tashidilek, good evening everyone and welcome to Tibet This Week, a weekly feature in English that tells you about this week's news on Tibet, His Holiness the Dalai Lama and Central Tibetan Administration. Let's look at the headlines first. His Holiness decries caste-based discrimination, calls for inter-religious harmony in Zanskar. Revival of Nalanda tradition in Tibet, India and China, a success story, says Central Tibetan Administration President Dr. Lobsang Sangay. Central Tibetan Administration releases short video to mark the first anniversary of demolition of Larung Gar. Liu Xiaobo's take on his open letter about Tibet, an excerpt from an interview. His Holiness the Dalai Lama wrapped up his tour to Zanskar, where he gave a series of Buddhist teachings and empowerment and met with Muslim community. His Holiness urged the devotees, comprising mainly of local Tibetans and the Ladakhi community, to stop the practice of caste-based discrimination and calls for inter-religious harmony. His Holiness drew attention to the subtle tension between Buddhists and Muslim community and urged for communal harmony while calling for respect to all religious traditions. His Holiness noted that the collective interest of a community should take precedence over one's religious belief and that the division based on one's religious affiliation can only lead to chaos in the community.
One community, sense of one community, the catch issues. Any church mental singing, church meva yunguri, any church nala, any Nangbe church singing yunguri, Islam church singing yunguri. Christian tradition yunguri this was gergi that church taba rangmusin so gergi tondare a sense of community side jibe tondare the injibi kashmura.
Addressing a strong gathering of 10,000 devotees, His Holiness noted the prevalent practice of discriminating based on caste and termed it as shameful and sad. In a nutshell, the practice of caste system is a disservice to Buddhism, to Lord Buddha, and to the person of Dalai Lama. His Holiness said,
Sanjay Josu, Chola Josu, Kindu Josu, and Echibina, Rigu, Chenesho Mata. Rig member of Tungzu Shat and Sawan in the Shesho Mata. Saturday in the Sane, Cheranzo, Jizogi, Lamlula, Ka Dache, Todu, Jimin, Tungzu Shat, Chabina, Sanjay Cotton Gallery, Kosovo, Gaurabaji Cotton Gallery, Shaswan.
Zanskar is one of the remotest areas in India. The President of Central Tibetan Administration, Dr. Lobsang Sangay, addressed the students and faculty at the Central University of Tibetan Studies, Varanasi. In his address, President said, His Holiness, the Great 14 Dalai Lama's visionary leadership has triumphed cultural revolution and China's successive efforts to erase Tibet.
Nalanda-based monasteries, you see all the panditas, people always say Tibetan monasteries, but these are Nalanda-based Mahaviras that we have rebuilt. In exile, we succeeded in rebuilding all the major monasteries destroyed in Tibet.
President Dr. Sangay presented a power-packed narrative on the revival of Tibetan Buddhism, mainly Nalanda tradition in Tibet, India and China.
A 70,000 characters petition submitted by late Panchen Lama to Mao Zedong. It listed that 98% of monasteries and nunneries in Tibet were destroyed by 1962. This date is very important.
Dr. Sangay noted the visionary leadership of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, which was instrumental in rebuilding and reviving the Buddhist monasteries and Nalanda tradition in exile.
In exile, we succeeded in rebuilding all the major monasteries destroyed in Tibet. So now we have 265 monasteries and nunneries, 42,000 monks and nuns.
Drawing on the success of preserving the Buddhist tradition extending beyond exile in India, Dr. Sangay said, Buddhism is making its mark in the West.
Now we have around 2,000 Buddhist centers around the world.
Dr. Sangay also said Buddhism inside China has revived to the extent that China couldn't succeed in destroying Buddhism in Tibet.
Buddhism has been revived inside China. Even Chinese have embraced Buddhism. Buddhism has spread all over China. Right? So it's estimated that there are around 300 to 400 million Buddhists in China. The Communist Party membership is only 82 million. But there are already 300 to 400 million Buddhists in China, so there are more Buddhists than Communist Party members. So one reason why Chinese government is afraid of His Holiness Dalai Lama is he will have 300 or 400 million members automatically. So we have succeeded.
The success story of revival of Nalanda tradition reflects the rugged determination, hard work, and the resilience of the Tibetan people. Dr. Sangay said, adding that this is the success story and the fulfillment of the vision of His Holiness the Dalai Lama. Marking the first anniversary since the demolitions at Larung Gar began, the Department of Information and International Relations of the Central Tibetan Administration on Thursday released a 2-minute video titled Prayers to the Chinese Pop, the Story of the Larung Gar Nuns. On July 20 last year, the Chinese authorities began the demolition of Larung Gar, one of the world's largest Buddhist academies. Speaking of the 2-minute video, Kaldan Somo, head of European Union, United Nations and Human Rights Desk of the Department of Information and International Relations said, "In this video, we have shown how the dirge of the tragedy continues unabated. The nuns are ignored and in solitary, while the decimation continues." The president of Central Tibetan Administration, Dr. Lobsang Sangay, said, "What is unfolding at Larung Gar is reminiscent of the bitter experience of cultural revolution. We fear that the cultural revolution is reviving in Tibet," said Dr. Sangay. International Relations Secretary of the Department of Information and International Relations, Mr. Sonam Nobu Dakpo, said, "The bulldozing of Tibet's Buddhist Academy stirred wide-scale response and action from the international community."
In December last year, the European Parliament expressed its concerns on the demolition of Larung Gar. They have adopted a resolution condemning the Chinese government. In February this year, on the eve of the 34th session of the United Nations Human Rights Council, 6 experts of the United Nations Human Rights Council expressed concern and gave a written presentation to the Chinese government, and which stated that they were concerned about the destruction and demolition of Larung Gar. In the written intervention communicated to the Chinese government, that Larung Gar is a living, vital center of Tibetan Buddhist teachings that is renowned worldwide and across China, and is of great significance in terms of Tibetan language, culture, and religion, as well as for a new generation of Chinese Buddhist scholars and pilgrims.
Secretary of the Department of Information and International Relations, Ms. Tenzing Dadun Shirling, said, "The Chinese government's forcible eviction of residents at Larung Gar, including large numbers of nuns, encompass a systematic and series of rights violations."
And such arbitrary and dictatorial acts actually challenges the very accountability, integrity, and the image of the Human Rights Council in itself, and therefore I really think that the world must act together to make China a responsible and an accountable member of the UN Human Rights Council.
An interview with deceased Nobel laureate Liu Xiaobo, conducted by Journeyman.tv in the year 2008, featured Liu Xiaobo speaking about his open support for freedom and equality for Tibetans in Tibet. Let us look at an excerpt from the interview.
You were one of the top signatories in the open letter to the government about Tibet. What was the reason for the open letter on Tibet?
写公开信的这个理由就是说，第一点发生了西藏这么大的问题，那么呢引起这么多关注，我们觉得呢，中国的汉族人的知识分子应该表明自己关于西藏问题的态度吧。 这个东西呢，就是中国是一体的西藏人的人权问题实际上是跟大陆内地的所有的人权问题在一起的关注西藏的人权，在某种程度上也是关注我们汉族人自己的人权。还有再一个，我们还有一个动机，就是为了缓解官方为了他刻意制造这种汉藏之间的冲突矛盾，那么我们这些汉族知识分子，我们要表明我们的一种态度。
That's all for this week. See you next Friday. Have a good weekend.